Chapter 19, Retreat. From General Revel's perspective, the Simbalo campaign was not going well. The Federation Armada, with himself and Vice Admiral Carell heading the primary battle groups, was steadily closing in on Abawa Ku. The vanguard, including the 127th, continued to perform well, but several units following the 127th, which were scheduled to assault the top of the umbrella-shaped fortress, had already been roundly trounced. Should the Armada lose even one of its remaining main fleets, he would be forced to rethink the entire campaign. At least the 127th is still proceeding with its attack, he thought. He was worried. Was it really safe to stake so much on such a tiny unit? He believed in the Pegasus II and its 3 suits, but he had to think about the entire Armada. There was still a deep-rooted prejudice in the force against suits, a belief that they were just another fighting machine with a weird humanoid shape. "We'd better take Abawa Ku quickly," he muttered. He wanted to avoid heavy losses, but the Zeon forces arrayed before him, including Vice Admiral Randolph Weigelman's men on Abawa Ku, were putting up an impressive defense. He was particularly disturbed by the use of satellite missiles, or what were in effect huge chunks of asteroid material with old-fashioned recycled chemical rocket engines strapped to them. Like giant boulders hurled over huge distances, satellite missiles were relatively easy to avoid, but they were also cheap to assemble and thus could be used in vast numbers. They were a crude, comic book approach to weaponry, yet they had already destroyed several state-of-the-art ships in the Earth Federation Armada. They were an absolute victory for Zeon in terms of cost performance. On Abawa Ku, after the first wave of satellite missiles was launched, the approaching Federation ships seemed to disperse their forces laterally, fanning the defenders' fear of being surrounded. Vice Admiral Randolph Weigelman, in charge of the fortress defenses, nonetheless remained calm. "Hit each unit," he commanded. "Remember, they're most vulnerable where overextended." In the command center of the Federation flagship Drog, General Reveal was quick to detect the change in Abawa Ku tactics. "Pull in our forces more," he ordered his officers. "Concentrate on a weak point in their defense and break it." His order was acknowledged and conveyed, but in one of the quirks of warfare it was misinterpreted. The entire Armada, instead of moving forward, began to retreat. Someone misinterpreted his order to pull in as pull back, and the code "the Simbalo strings are broken" was transmitted from his flagship to the entire Armada. And it meant not attack but retreat. Revel secretly raged at whoever had botched his orders, but he was smart enough not to scream publicly in the command center. They were in the midst of a ferocious battle, and he knew what had happened. On displays throughout the command center, remote telescope cameras showed Zeon's space fortress Abawa Ku and repeated flashes of missiles being fired. Only an utter idiot would fail to feel terror at the sight. Retreating was the logical thing to do. Many of the other staff officers were also furious, especially since the enemy had only just been engaged, and it was too early to declare a clear victor. But Revel's next order restored their spirits. "We've no time to lose," he barked. "Our group will move to destroy the Solomon forces in front of the Corregidor Shoal Zone. Vice Admiral Carroll's group will support us." Cran and answered Bright. "There's no mistaking the signal, sir," she said. "It's in Alpha Gain code. It clearly reads the Simbalo strings are broken." "The code's correct, Skipper," Mark called down from his perch on the bridge crane. "But it seems odd. There's no way to confirm the movements of Ravel's group at this point, but the Photofax squad has already run into other Zeon forces out of Solomon. I can't believe Revel abandoned them, sir." "Looks like we're left guessing in the dark about our own Armada," Bright grumbled, leaning back into his chair. As he watched from the bridge, he saw an explosion on yet another warship nearby. 2 other Federation vessels, apparently from the 203D, pulled alongside it, trying desperately to rescue the surviving crew. A monitor suspended above him flickered to life, and a man dressed in a Federation captain's uniform appeared on the screen. "Brait, this is Gror, commander of the 203D. The 127th is to immediately proceed to support the Photofac fleet. When we've completed taking in survivors, we'll follow. The strings do not all appear to be broken yet." "Yes, sir." Bright quickly answered with a snappy salute. He turned and looked at Sayla. She had her back to him, but she seemed to understand what he wanted, for she immediately announced over the communications system, "C-108, return to ship, return to ship." Bright ordered the Pegasus II to turn around. Then he jumped out of his seat and barked, "I want the ship immediately inspected for damage and the pressure level rechecked." He looked somehow relieved. Lieutenant Mirai Yashima, manning the ship's helm, took the time out to check its operation and gently scolded her skipper while she did so. "I wouldn't relax too much," she said. "Trying to reach a Bawaku or joining up with the Photofac fleet both run the same level of risk." "What kind of a comment is that, Mirai?" Bright retorted, walking over to her. "Do I look like I'm relaxing?" "A little, sir. Don't forget we just lost Kriya, one of our best pilots, and we only have 3 others left. It just seems to me we should try and maximize our chance of survival." "Knock it off, Mirai," Bright angrily whispered in her ear. "You're starting to sound like my mother or my wife." "Sorry," she apologized, startled by his reaction. She turned and stared silently out the window of the bridge. Behind her, she could hear him angrily ordering the others about. She could not help smiling to herself. "You're getting too sensitive, Bright," she thought. The Pegasus II was depending more and more on Amuro Ray, Kai Shiden, Hayato Kobayashi in their mobile suits. Immediately after returning to the ship, the young pilots had to prepare frantically for yet another sortie. While Mekaman checked and resupplied their suits, they changed their sweat-drenched underwear and redressed in the locker room. There was no time to mourn Kriya's death. "You think Kriya had an amulet with him?" Kai wondered aloud. "He always was a little careless about that stuff," Hayato answered. "Maybe he didn't believe in it." "What about you, Amuro?" Kai asked. "You ever get an amulet from your favorite petty officer? When I say it, but we're dead without you." "If you weren't along, nobody in the world could get me to go on the next mission." "Yeah, Amuro, she must have given you one," Hayato said mournfully. "Sorry, guys, it just wasn't like that. I know it's hard to believe." "Wasn't like Tat?" Kai retorted. "Hey, it's just like Sayla Mass to do something like that, to really screw things up for us in a big way. Tell you what, I'll go ask her myself. I'll be back in a second." "Kai, knock it off. We're launching again any minute." "That's exactly why we've got to hurry, right?" Amulets were snips of pubic hair carried by pilots to ward off bad luck. Taken lightly for years, the superstition was now widely believed. To some outside the force it seemed a juvenile, even somewhat obscene practice, but to the pilots it had a simple, profound meaning. They were going into battle, and if a woman could give them something symbolizing her desire for them to return alive, it would somehow help the odds. Originally, it was thought better to have an amulet from a woman living on Earth, but since waves were now working and fighting in space, they were also potential donors. In the vast emptiness of the universe, the amulets were a tangible reminder of life. Among the military, they were no laughing matter. Kai switched on the communications link to the bridge and Sayla Mass appeared on the wall display, looking a little tired. "Requesting permission from the skipper," he demanded in a loud voice, "for Petty Officer Sayla Mass to come to the pilot's briefing room." Sayla looked startled, but she did as asked and relayed the message to Bright behind her. Amuro, watching her over Kai's shoulder, couldn't help marveling at her beautiful profile. Bright appeared. "What is it?" he demanded. "Just do us a favor this once, Skipper," Hayato pleaded. "Amuro needs to say goodbye to the petty officer." "And we don't have much time, sir," Kai interjected. Bright frowned but reluctantly consented. "Understood, but only for 10 minutes. As they watched, he tapped Sayla on the shoulder and called for a stand-in for her at the communications console. When the other crewmen arrived, Bright turned back to the monitor camera and said, "I don't want you boys to start thinking this is your final mission. Amuro, you there? You hear me, Amuro? You're to come back alive, not dead. Without you, the Pegasus II is a sitting duck." "Roger, sir." Amuro moved in view of the camera so Bright could see him. Kai, standing beside him, took a page out of the little notebook pilots carried and waved it in front of the communications camera so Bright could see. It had an amulet taped to it. "Here's the problem, Skipper," Kai said into the mic. "This idiot doesn't have one of these." Bright exclaimed with genuine anger. "So Sayla bungled it again, eh?" Kai quickly shut his notebook. Amuro couldn't resist ribbing him. "Hey, Kai, who'd you get that from anyway?" "I wouldn't tell you even if hell froze over," Kai retorted, quickly slipping it into an inner jacket pocket. What had once seemed an amusing superstition, Amuro realized, was now a deadly serious ritual. To fight these days, the ones that are real popular. Popular? Sayla finally understood. Her expression hardened, and she stared directly at Amuro. "Do you mean to tell me you're asking me for that just because Kai and Hayato want you to? Are you serious?" "Kai and Hayato are serious. It's not really that big a deal to me personally." "Well, tell them no, then." "But Sayla, I know how they feel about it." "Well, I don't. For the life of me, I don't understand how you have the nerve to ask me just because they want you to." "Well, I'm sorry," Amuro said. "Why don't you just pretend I gave you one?" she said, standing up and walking out the door of the room. Amuro tried to follow her, but she had already grabbed a lift grip in the passageway and rounded a corner several meters ahead of him. When he turned the corner, he could see her still traveling away from him, her blonde hair intermittently highlighted by the emergency lamps lining the dimly lit passageway. It was too bad about the amulet, but he would have to forget it. He just wished they could have spent more time together. He wondered if waves used amulets, and if men normally presented them with one. When Amuro reached the flight deck, he felt a familiar sensation, the tension before going into battle. The Gundam's left hand, scorched in the fight earlier, was apparently beyond repair. "Weld the shield on the damn thing if you have to," he shouted to one of the nearest mecha men. Then he jumped and sailed up to the gangway on the second floor of the flight deck hangar. All the talk about amulets had at least taken some of the tension out of him. Feeling suddenly hungry, he decided to drop into the mess hall, where he ran into Kai. Hayato was still working on his suit with the mecha man down on the flight deck. He ordered a hamburger, took a seat, and started to wolf it down. "Well?" Kai demanded. "Got a Mac," he said, deliberately trying to imitate an old gangster movie he had once seen. 3, to be exact. "But I can't show 'em to you. I cut a deal with the petty officer." Kai said, peeved. "Hey, look, if she thinks you're going to leer over something that private, do you really think she'd hand him over that easily? She's got her pride, you know." Hey. "I know what's going on, Amuro. Basically, you're awful naive when it comes to this stuff. You're just stuck on the girl, right?" "What's it to you?" "Nothing." Kai finished off his tube of coffee and prepared to return to the flight deck. "You've got a healthy attitude. Keep it up, Boy Scout." Out of the corner of his eye, Amuro watched Kai leave. He felt like he had cleared a big hurdle, but he wondered why he had not pushed Sayla harder. He had wanted the amulet. He had wanted it for himself, and yet he had only been able to tell her how Kai and Hayato had been pushing him to get it from her. He wished he had had more confidence. He wished he weren't so sensitive and self-conscious around her. He wished he were older. After strapping himself in the seat of the Gundam's cockpit, Amuro communicated with the ship's bridge several times and then finally got a channel all to himself with Sayla. Taking advantage of the opportunity, he quickly said, "I asked you because I wanted it, Sayla. I needed it." She had acknowledged his statement without deviating from her official tone. He suddenly felt relieved, more relieved than he would have felt even if she had handed him an amulet. Even if it was all a lie, and he was prepared that it might be, he was overjoyed. Then the tense voice of Callahan Slay, the flight deck supervisor, echoed in his helmet headphones. "Junior grade Lieutenant Amuro Ray, cleared for catapult." "Roger, sir." Amuro heard Hayato and Kai's steady voices echo in his ear. "We're counting on you, G." Then his main engine fired, and the G-force suddenly pushed him upward. Once more the Gundam mobile suit plunged into the star-strewn blackness. Cecilia Zabi's forces had been granted use of a small section of Abawa Ku for their command center. It was a cramped area, and the room commander, Charaznable, Lieutenant Chalia Bull and Lieutenant Leroy Gilliam were in, the armory was no exception. It made Char feel even more irritated. In his drive for self-perfection, Char seemed mature beyond his years, but his occasional inflexibility betrayed his youth. They were waiting for Commander Garcia Dowell of the Flanagan Agency, and he hated having to meet people he did not particularly like. Garcia, pallid as ever, hurried into the room with his files in hand. "Sorry to keep you waiting," he said, ignoring the salutes from Chalia and Leroy, seated behind Char. He then sat in the chair facing Char. "Please allow me to be frank, Commander," Garcia said to Char, speaking with more courtesy than normal. Char merely nodded, wondering what in heaven could have made the former clerk so agitated. "The overall battle seems to be going in our favor," Garcia said. "Revel's mysterious change of course has effectively led most of the Armada to retreat into the Corregidor Shoal Zone. Losses at this point are fairly evenly divided between us and the Federation. Abawaku still survives. At one point, things were going so well for us that the General Staff thought we might have been able to conclude the entire war. There is one major problem, however." Garcia suddenly stopped talking and glared at Chalia and Leroy seated behind Char. "Don't worry, these are the new type candidates your agency recommended," Char said. "They may even know what's going on better than you do. And by the way, you can forget about rank in here." "Ah, now I see. Sorry." "Well, let me be frank, Commander," Garcia said, repeating his earlier intro. "To tell you the truth, until I heard that His Excellency Dozal Zabi's unit had been annihilated, I didn't really believe you were qualified to lead true new types." "What makes you say that?" Char asked, wishing Garcia would hurry up and get to the point. "Corregidor Shoal Zone. But it's even odder that all the ships in Dozal's unit were destroyed, and that not a single Zaku survived. Normally in an engagement, even in what we call a defeat, at least 1/4 of the Zakus are able to escape. Frankly, I don't know what's going on, or if it's just because of the Gundam and its pilot. But whatever it is, the Federation new type unit has become terrifyingly powerful. That's why I have to apologize to you, Commander Char. I doubted you at one point, but you came back alive after encountering the same unit that annihilated everyone else. That means you're one of the few that can actually hold your own against it. Please forgive me." Char said, ignoring the praise. "I think I get the picture. About Revel and his little detour, though, I think that until this last battle even he didn't know how powerful his new type unit is. But just to change the subject, whatever happened to the request I put into you?" "For the extra Zakus?" Garcia said with a wry grin. "I managed to procure 5 more for you, and we can pull pilots for them out of the second new type unit Caecilia's planning. The order has already gone out, and they should be arriving here in a few hours." "Good. And right now I really need the leg of my Rick Dom repaired. The Federation Gundam's going to arrive here soon." "Here?" "Correct. It still hasn't been destroyed, right?" "True. Or at least we have no information to that effect." "Then it's on its way," Char said. Then he added with a grin, "And by the way, about those 5 Zakus, we'd really prefer Rick Doms." I'd be glad to petition Her Excellency for you," Garcia said, gathering together all his notes. Then, standing up, he announced, "I wish you the best, Commander." "Don't worry, I'll do my best," Char replied with a smile and a snappy salute. After Garcia departed, Leroy uneasily asked Char, "The Gundam pilot worries me, sir. I've never heard of anyone's performance increasing exponentially in such a short time. You think it's really possible?" Leroy was expecting an answer, but he didn't get one because both Char and Chalia Bull were too busy asking themselves the same question. They knew Garcia's report had to be taken with a grain of salt. Battlefield reports were often inflated 30 to 50%. If, for example, 5 mobile suits destroyed an enemy cruiser without confirming who would take credit for the kill, the report sometimes listed 5. Instead of 1, enemy ships annihilated. To prevent this problem, both Zeon and Federation forces planted still and video cameras with panoramic views in combat zones and used them to record the action whenever possible. But it took hours to confirm later how many ships a specific suit had bagged. Still, although Garcia's report certainly had fuzzy areas, The urgent manner in which he had presented it suggested that a serious debacle had occurred. From the perspective of the intelligence experts on Abawa Ku, at least, the Federation's new type unit had clearly pulled off an incredible feat. Chalias stared at the ceiling as he spoke, and his gaze was so intense that Char wondered if he could see straight out into space. All he could see was the ceiling's shiny, spotless gray plastic finish. He turned around in his chair with his chin propped on his hand and asked, "Tell me, Lieutenant, can you see through walls?" "She was 22, right?" Char said, suddenly turning to Leroy. "Yes, sir," he answered reflexively. "And she wasn't always easy to get along with. I don't think she would have fallen for anyone 2 or 3 years younger than her unless she was attracted to his innocence and sensitivity. But I'm sure there was something else about him that she found intellectually interesting. And I'll bet it was his new type potential. It's just possible that this Amuro Ray character's evolved enough to understand what we're trying to do. Maybe he would cooperate with us." "Well," Char replied, "we can't exactly arrange a powwow with him in the middle of a battlefield, can we? Don't forget, I saw what he did to Lala Sun in combat. He can also be impulsive, Rash. I'd hesitate before I'd put a lot of trust in him. All I know about Ensign Lala Sun is what I read in Commander Garcia Dowell's reports, sir. Maybe she's the one responsible for triggering Amuro Ray's new type abilities. After all, as I understand it, she was a real rarity, someone with outstanding quantifiable new type potential." Char said. "If we locate the Gundam, sir," Leroy said, "I'd be glad to initiate communication." Char turned around and didn't answer Leroy. "Contact with him." "I know," Char replied stonily. "It's a little hard for me to say this," Chalia continued, "but with all due respect, maybe you've got too much of a grudge against him to appreciate the possibilities. You've already encountered him before. Don't you think he'd answer if you approached him point blank?" Leroy was so astounded by Sharia's bluntness that he nearly fell out of his chair. He remained silent and waited to see what would happen. "Sure," Char said. "I admit I don't like him. Ever since Lala Sun, ever since I first met him, I've had nothing but embarrassing defeats. And you know what happened in our last encounter?" Others would tell him. Lights flared 300 or 400 kilometers ahead of the L3 like fireworks on a distant shore, indicating the destruction of more Zeon and Federation ships. A Columbus-type transport, the L3 was built with a skeletal structure designed to carry containers. Its only defenses were 6 missile tubes gracing its prow, stern, top, bottom, and sides. After carefully wending its way through debris in the Corregidor Shoal Zone, it finally made visual contact with the Pegasus II. It used to be commonly assumed that gravity-free conditions existed uniformly throughout the open areas of space, but around Earth there is actually a constant interplay between the gravitational forces of the Sun, the Earth, and its moon. With the Earth revolving around the Sun, and the Moon revolving around both, there are in fact points in space where the gravity of all three neutralize each other. The most dramatic being Lagrange points, where the Earth Federation built its groups of space colonies called sides. And just as there are regional differences in tides on Earth, in space, in addition to Lagrange points, there are also other, smaller gravity-neutral areas, many of which are poorly defined and difficult to measure. In the space age, a great deal of debris, mainly landfill, from decades of colony construction had collected in them, creating what were called shoal zones. Occasionally, old satellites were even found in them, relics from the early days of space exploration. On the bridge of the L-3, Lieutenant Matilda Ogden watched as the oddly shaped Pegasus II came into view. Then she grabbed the ship phone and announced, "Prepare to unload the number 14 starboard container block immediately." She began thinking of Amuro Ray, the young pilot whom she had last run into on the Federation's LH moon base. She knew he was attached to the Pegasus, though. He had always seemed incurably naive and romantic, but she felt indebted to him. Her fiancé, Lieutenant Woody Maiden, was a straight-laced military engineer whom she had fallen in love with at first sight, but she had a contrary streak in her that never allowed her to admit it. Just when she had been frantically trying to figure out a way to get him to propose to her, Amuro had happened to be around, and luckier yet, Woody had taken notice of him. After she had mentioned Amuro's name in an offhanded way several times, Woody, the stalwart, reserved Woody, had become visibly jealous. Eventually he had gotten the message and had asked her to spend the rest of her life with him. "You mean you want me to be your wife?" she had asked. "Damn straight," he had replied. When the current campaign was over, Matilda planned to have a real wedding, and she hoped Amuro Ray would come. "I wonder how he's doing," she whispered to herself, only to be overheard by the young skipper of the L3 standing behind her. "You mind?" she asked. Behind her, the L3 skipper muttered something about private communications being punishable under ship's regulations, but she ignored him. On a monitor before her, she could see a pleasant-looking wave from the Pegasus, busily preparing to record her message. "Tell him," she said, "that I'm getting married when this campaign's over, and that he's invited to the wedding." "Did you say wedding?" the blonde petty officer on the Pegasus asked, startled. Wedding was such an unexpected word, given the environment they were in, that it didn't register at first. "Yes, give him my greetings, and wish him good hunting." "Understood. Consider it done." Matilda smiled when she heard the chipper reply. She had encountered the petty officer twice before, but did not remember her name or much about her. She knew intuitively, however, that Amuro Ray probably had fond thoughts of her. "Hey," the L3 skipper yelled behind her. "No private chit-chat, remember?" He angrily grabbed her shoulder and tried to turn her in his direction, but she was faster than he was and brushed off his hand. Her cheeks were flushed with indignation. "The Pegasus II is directly under General Ravel's command, and Amuro Ray is the key pilot on the warship," she admonished him. "I frankly consider it my duty to establish friendly communications with him." It was not a very logical response, but she had said it with enough emotion to throw him off, and for the moment her performance had won out. On the monitor, the Pegasus's blonde communications officer chuckled, and then the screen went blank. The L3 skipper, humiliated on both sides by two attractive women, just sulked. "Don't worry, Captain," Matilda said, patting his arm as if to console him. "You look great." She then walked over to the other side of the bridge. He stared at her shapely back, and for a second almost forgot about being angry. Then he shouted, "Rules aren't created just to be broken, you know." "I'll remember that," Matilda said softly. On the Pegasus II, the pilots and core crew, those with the most new type potential, spontaneously gathered together in the briefing room for a brainstorm eyeing session led by Bright Noah. Lieutenant Slager Rowe, true to form, barged in on them, joking, "Maybe you guys are all just hallucinating again." "Slager," Bright said, sounding very much like the ship's captain, "if you're just here to make trouble, you'd better leave." "I don't know what Amuro saw out there," Kai was saying, "but when we contacted Dozel's fleet, I really felt the presence of something powerful. How about you, Hayato?" "I'll say," Hayato answered immediately. "I'm not sure whether it was really from the mobile armor Amuro told us to aim at, but whatever it was, the closer we got, the more powerful it felt, and the more I knew we had to destroy it. Kai and I never actually established visual contact with because we had to train our sights on the Gando flagship and cover for Amuro. But I don't think that contradicts what Amuro says about a specter-like force out there. It's just that I was in a combat zone right behind Dozel's unit, and I didn't sense anything that powerful. I'm sure it could exist, though." On the desktop in front of him and laughing in bewilderment, "You mean to say that maybe the apparition or whatever it was that I saw was generated by some sort of weird zombie psychospasm of rage and frustration? Sounds a little too far-fetched." No one in the room responded. Slager Rowe leaned over Sayla in a typically boorish attempt to grab her attention and grumbled, "Hey, you really believe all this stuff?" "It could all be real," Sayla said, trying to signal for help from Kai by raising her voice. "If not, I'm sure Kai would do something about it." Kai came to her defense immediately. "Knock it off, Slager. Amuro's already proposed having a party tonight." "A what?" "A party," Amuro interjected. "It's a way for me to repay my fellow pilots for something." Slager glanced at Amuro, and Sayla met his gaze for a second, and then smiled as if to confirm what Amuro had just said. Hey, sweet Sayla," Slager said in his typically coarse fashion. "Did you really let the kid do that to you? Where's that leave me? Baby, tell me it's not true." "Slager, Kai, Amuro," Bright finally yelled. Cut the yapping. We've got important things to discuss here. The Pegasus 2 may take independent action soon, so some of what we decide now may have life and death significance for all of us later. Save the jokes for later. We don't have much time. Jokes? Slegger said. Whoa, that's below the belt. We're not joking here, Skipper. Amuro and Kai looked at each other. Both of them had noted Bright's words. Amuro shot a questioning expression in Mirai's direction. She understood what it meant, gently tapped Bright's hand and asked, "Excuse me, sir, but what are you talking about? What do you mean by independent action? Did you get new instructions from General Revel?" "No," Bright said, as if surprised she had asked. "Not at all. I was just speculating. It just sort of suddenly occurred to me, that's all." "Really?" Slegger said. "It didn't sound that way." "Hey, Slegger," Kai said in a clipped tone. "He can say anything he wants to here. This is a brainstorming session, right? And it may be our last." Slegger adjusted the collar of his uniform and turned toward Bright. "Sorry, Skipper. Speculate all you want." "Well," Bright continued, "considering how much we've already accomplished on the Pegasus 2 this far, I'm beginning to wonder what our true potential is. It's just a fantasy, but I've been thinking maybe we could even take on Supreme Commander Giranzabi ourselves without the rest of the Armada, and do it soon, like tomorrow or the day after." Mirai, shocked, nonetheless managed to quip, "I never knew you had such a vivid imagination, Skipper. I'm going to have to rethink my whole impression of you." "Maybe it's crazy," Bright added with a sheepish grin. "As I said, I'm just speculating. I guess I'm trying to make 2 points. First, if it's true that Amuro's new type abilities actually allowed him to detect a specter-like malevolent force emanating from Dozalzabi, then I think we seriously have to rethink the root cause of the entire conflict. If specific individuals are responsible for its continuation, then one logical candidate is Giranzabi. Maybe our main mission should be to eliminate him. Second, I think the current Earth Federation's position, that Abawa Ku is Zeon's final line of defense, is a little naive. It's even occurred to me that maybe the Zeon deliberately letting us get this close. Confusion among our own forces has given them valuable breathing room. Frankly, I'm worried the rumors we've heard are true, that they've prepared some sort of ultimate secret weapon. What do you all think?" Amuro best expressed the sentiments of the others. "So that's why you're in a hurry," he said in an ear whisper. Bright knew that during peacetime it usually took the collective will of the people to transform a system of government. But the Pegasus was at war, and in war, a successful localized military action could fundamentally alter the balance of power and even topple the existing order. The Earth Federation forces had been able to resist Giranzabi thus far, simply because of their material superiority. But if they were really only a lumbering aggregate of individuals with no overriding philosophy, no basic values, and no vision, as many complained, then all Giranzabi would need to achieve his dreams would be a single dramatic victory. It was entirely possible that, as Bright had tried to imply, they were already ensnared by his consciousness. He wanted to say it, that it was all a matter of consciousness. He started to speak, hesitated for a second, and to his surprise, Amuro spoke for him. "We've enjoyed General Revel's support," Amuro said, "but never that of the entire Earth Federation. And without it, we'll lose the war. But if Giranzabi is the main force behind this war, and he really does have such a powerful presence, we'd be able to detect it even easier than we did with Dozal." "A malevolent force," Kai said, only half joking. "We're dealing with an incredible monster." "And what the skipper's saying isn't all speculation," Mirai added. "Exactly," Amuro answered. "If we have the ability to detect such a force, we should go ahead and capture Giranzabi. If it'd end the war, I think maybe we should do it." The word maybe betrayed the doubt behind his confident expression. "Think we could persuade General Revel to help?" Slegger asked, finally beginning to realize what his mysterious crewmates were really suggesting. "And even if we could, think there's a chance in hell of us partying over to the Drog today and having the brass that surround him let us see him? Let's be realistic, guys. We've got the most powerful warship in the entire Earth Federation force. If we've got time enough to screw around with ideas like this, The first thing they'd tell us to do would be to destroy a Baoku. Slegger was right, but Amuro's next observation startled everyone. "There's something else that worries me even more than that," he said. "If, like the skipper, we take this fantasy to the limit, and we actually do succeed in deposing Jiren and ending the war, what's going to happen then? For starters, we'd probably be punished for violating military discipline. And an even bigger problem is that the Earth Federation's General Staff Headquarters, Shaburo, would still be around. That's an idea I don't like." "You mean it might take 10 or 20 years to get promoted in the military," Bright said with a wink, "and eventually be given high-ranking government positions?" "No," Amuro said with an unexpectedly serious expression. "I think you can assume that whatever happens to us might not be that positive." "Why?" Amuro turned and looked at everyone in the room. "Don't get me wrong," he said. "It's not that I don't believe in democracy. It's just that using simple majority rule to decide everything makes me a little nervous. Especially because, in the Federation government, the final decisions really represent a consensus of the interests of the politicians themselves. I can imagine a scenario where we succeed in destroying Jiren, and then people start asking why. Why, out of all the Federation forces, was the Pegasus II able to do it? The answer, of course, would be that we're new types. A bunch of paranormal espers, a bunch of professional killers. They'd start to even question whether new types and normal people can coexist. They'd say we dominate normal people and threaten everything they value. Just think of the possibilities. Everybody fibs once in a while in the real world, but they'd say that new types can see right through normal people, read their thoughts like a book. They'd say that we're a supernatural phenomenon, that we're not humans in the normal sense of the word, that we're freaks that should be banished from normal human society. What are we going to do if people start talking this way? Forget about being promoted. We should worry about surviving." "Not the most eloquent speech I've ever heard," Kai muttered, nodding and looking at the others. "But not bad. I think Amuro's right." Slegger, trying to look as informed as possible, turned and asked Sela, "Listen, you know Zeon Zimdaikun, the guy who first talked about new types and founded the republic that became the Principality of Zeon? Wasn't he murdered by the Zabi family?" "Zeon Daikun?" Sela replied cautiously. "I don't know about that, but I do know he was a good man, and he wasn't talking about the kind of new types that Amuro's been referring to. He was talking about an enlightenment that all mankind would experience. But I can see Amuro's point about the possibility of new types being purged by society at large." "Amuro's right," Bright added. "The Earth Federation needs us as long as there's a war on, but who knows what'll happen when the war's over. The average person may usually know what's right and wrong, but usually he also winds up going along with what his government says." "Let's not deal in generalizations," Mirai said suddenly. "Don't forget we may be forced to make some decisions on our own real soon. We'd better have a clear idea what we're going to do then." "We could always fight just hard enough to stay alive," Kai interjected. "No," Bright answered firmly. "If we do that, we'll probably be targeted by some final weapon Zeon's developing, and that'll be the end of us." "Skipper," Amuro asked, "how do you know that?" "I don't know, Amuro," Bright answered. "I'm just guessing based on some circumstantial evidence. There had to be more to it than that," Amuro thought. He suddenly realized that Bright's own intuition and awareness were increasing. "You were right," he said. "We should get rid of Giran Zabi." "How?" Amuro grinned and said, "Well, we obviously can't pull off a frontal assault, but maybe there's someone close to him who would cooperate with us. Be a co-conspirator. That would help." He had no idea what he was trying to say. He was just fantasizing, letting his mind go, and relying on his own intuition. Co-conspirator? Right. I'm thinking along the same lines as you, Skipper. Someone, for example, like Char. Aznable. The Red Comet. You mean initiate contact with their new types? But Char was under Dozel Zabi's command. That's why I say, sir, maybe the whole thing's a fantasy. "I think we'd better take a break from this discussion," Bright finally announced. "We'll be resting in third combat position until we get further orders from Armada operations." Slegger muttered as the group dispersed, summing up with unexpected brilliance. "Maybe I'm a little slow compared to the rest of you new type candidates, but I fail to see how anyone here could be a freak. Seems like the ultimate criterion for a human is to be able to fall in love. and that's already happened. Amuro slipped off the lift grip and looked back at the ship's passageway he had just traversed. At the other end, under one of the emergency combat lights, he could see Sayla standing and talking with Mirai. He felt awkward because he had not invited her to join him in his room. A gulf had existed between them ever since she had made her crazy statement about killing her brother, Shar Aznable, but he still wanted her. He was a male with normal desires, and his nerves were frayed from combat. He thought about inviting her. He thought of how nice it would be to spend even 10 minutes alone with her and feel her touch, and he wondered if she felt the same way, if she missed him too. He felt a pang of guilt at his thoughts, at his desire to wait for her after all. But he was unable to turn and walk away. Only a few minutes earlier he had been having philosophical discussions about new types. Now he was hoping for some physical attention from a woman. The contrast made him wonder how anyone in a normal human body could really become a true new type. He felt like an utter fool, standing and waiting for Sayla. He waited for a minute, and it seemed like an eternity. He suddenly resolved to forget her for now. He loosened the collar of his pilot suit, turned around, and started to head for his quarters. To his astonishment, Sayla skipped off the floor and grabbed onto a lift grip, running down the passageway toward him. From his perspective, she was flying through the air. She was, headed in his direction, coming toward him. In his rational mind, he hesitated, fearing he was expecting too much, but then he saw her float away from the lift grip right to him, her blonde hair shining beautifully in the light. He wondered if other men felt the way he felt now, and suspected they would have been more cool, confident, and detached. Sayla floated up to him, and stopped with her soft breasts against his chest. "Well, what happened, Mr. Amuro Ray?" I was afraid you wouldn't come, that's all. You didn't ask me, so I thought I'd probably better not come. But Mirai said I should. And there's something I wanted to tell you anyway." Amuro was no longer listening. He put his lips over hers. He knew by her response that she wanted him to touch her, that he could feel free to be with her. And he felt happy. "Amuro," Sayla said, turning her head and pulling away from his embrace. "You're violating military regulations, you know." With the wonderful sensation of her kiss lingering in his mind, he opened the door to his quarters, entered, and turned on the light. "By the way, you took that message from Lieutenant Matilda Agin, right? Do I really have to attend her wedding ceremony?" he asked. "Well, maybe she likes you, Amuro," Sayla said with a giggle. "She probably thinks you're cute." Cute was the last word he wanted to hear. He had never really expected anything of Matilda. She was an awfully attractive wave, and he had always enjoyed seeing her. To her, however, he had just been another earnest pilot cadet. "She said she's having a military wedding, Amuro, and I'm sure she just wants to invite a few people who've been nice to her. I'm sure she has lots of friends outside her immediate co-workers. No need to reassure me. Either way, I won't have to decide whether to go or not until this campaign's over. But that's just it, Amuro. For a woman, a wedding's important. It's like an affirmation of life. Of course, I don't really go along with that stuff myself. Matilda's a little too feminine for me." Sayla put her hair up, stood up, and crossed the room toward the shower. It was a joy to watch her move, Amuro thought. She looked fantastic, even in a khaki military-issue bath towel. But he also knew they would never have enough time together. The war was still on. He began to ponder some of the things that had been said at the meeting earlier. He was irritated by his own fickleness. It seemed that as soon as one problem was solved, he immediately started thinking of another. He was just glad that he had not raised the issue of Char again, or Sayla would have thought that was the only reason he had invited her to join him. It would be better to interact with her on only one level now, and that was physical. When Sayla came out of the shower, she gave him a quizzical look, but he did not respond and entered the shower room himself. In order to compensate for the weightless environment, showers on board ship used pressurized steam blasted from all angles. To prevent drowning, there was a barrier in the shower that isolated the head and kept it dry. He rested his head on a chin rest and resolved to discuss Char with Sayla later after all. When he emerged, to his surprise he found she wanted to talk about her brother. She had come to Amuro's room partly because she too had been unable to stop thinking about what Bright had said, and partly, since Amuro had brought up Char's name, because she felt the need to resolve the issue between them. "Casval always said he was going to avenge Father's death," she began. "But that was 7 or 8 years ago, before we parted. We were both still kids then. I received a few letters from him after he entered Officers' Academy on Xeon. Not the usual video cards, but old-fashioned typed letters. He never wrote anything beyond the usual pleasantries. But I got the sense that he was maturing, and that he wasn't just in the academy to carry out his crazy plan for revenge. I really felt he was growing wiser and wiser. And you know what? He told me he was a classmate of Garma Zabi, the youngest son of Sovereign Dagwin Zabi. He said they were really good friends. Can you believe that? You know, Sayla, Garma Zabi was piloting the Gao bomber we ran into after leaving Side 7, and your brother was probably in the same area. I wonder what it all means. I don't know. I didn't have the same awareness of him then that I do now. The official combat reports I read were all so rough, it was impossible to really tell anything from them. What do you think? Seems to me, if I recall rightly, that he didn't defend the Gao bomber. I'm sure it wasn't intentional. I don't think he was in a position to do anything about it. Maybe some people in the Principality thought he was responsible for the death of a Zabi family member, but I don't think my brother's that careless. Let's hope not. But tell me, Sayla, getting back to the discussion we all had earlier, how do you think we can contact your brother? That's our main problem. The second problem is deciding whether or not he's actually approachable. I don't think my brother's basically changed much, Amuro. But you know, there's something else I've never told you about him. Remember the Texas colony? I met my brother there before it blew. You what? Amuro practically gasped. Sayla had her face turned to the side and was staring into space as if embarrassed. I am sorry, she said. Sorry? You don't need to feel sorry, Sayla. I don't care if you met him. I just want to know how, in heaven's name, you managed to meet him. There was a pitched battle going on inside the colony. Sayla shrugged. I felt as if Casval were calling me, she said. But you know what? When we actually came face to face, he seemed just like the brother I remembered. He had never even sent me a photograph of him all those years, but I recognized him right away. He warned me not to get involved in the war. I could get emotional about it, but he was my brother. Tough and gentle at the same time. Sayla's information was extremely important to Amuro, for it gave him a new insight into Char's character. If both Char and Sayla had the same new type attributes, then Char's feelings toward his sister could perhaps be exploited. It was a dangerous, naive idea, but everything he had heard about Char so far seemed to confirm his rapidly forming opinions. Both Amuro and Sayla were being sentimental, but it made both of them happy.